Friends, chess players, welcome back to this new episode. Today we're talking about calculation. We look at 3 calculation mistakes that we often make, and I'll also try to give you some advice on how to improve in this area, how to train yourself to avoid making calculation errors. So let's start with the first calculation mistake, which is what I like to call the phantom pieces error. And I'll show you a segment from one of my own games, one I have to admit I'm rather embarrassed about, played against, well, Neil Zarin a few years ago, which, in short, one of the Indian under-20 prodigy kids, so it's still a nice memory of this game. Even though here, unfortunately, I made a very serious calculation mistake, because in this position I played the crazy move h6. h6 might look like a pawn that's just hanging. But now I'll explain my thought process and the absolutely massive mistake I made in this analysis. I carefully analyzed the move where the bishop takes on h6, and at this point I saw knight takes f3 check. By doing this, I completely open up this long diagonal, and as you can see, bishop takes f3. And at this point my idea was bishop takes h6, the queen captures. And now I had planned to play bishop takes c3. Let's say I ended up considering the bishop twice, so in my mind I mistakenly visualized that the bishop, having just been captured, on h6, had disappeared from the board. A mistake, let's say, that might seem trivial, but actually, in our calculation, the error of visualizing the piece, sometimes we visualize a piece twice, sometimes we visualize it one time less, a piece that was there and then isn't anymore. These are the ones that, let's say, cause us the main mistakes. What is this error called? This is a visualization error. How do we solve this error? Well, we solve this error by doing visualization exercises. Here on the channel, I've already suggested several exercises to you. Unfortunately, the main ones are blindfolded. Because in fact, since we have to do visualization, whether you like it or not, we have to try to visualize. So I've made 2 of them for you. Videos, you can find them here on the channel, and with these videos, you can start from 0 and gradually progress. I've suggested exercises that are always a bit more challenging, so go check them out if you want to see some exercises to improve your visualization and maybe avoid leaving a pawn hanging like I did with the little helpers. Let's move on to the second mistake. Let's forget about this one, really a bad game, and let's look at a more entertaining one. I played this game last summer against a Slovenian national female master, and in this position my opponent didn't consider an in-between move. So another visualization and calculation mistake is not considering your opponent's intermediate moves. In fact, my opponent played h3 here. Now, if you want to treat this as an exercise, I invite you to pause the video and try to find how black can gain an advantage. So, I'm also giving you a little calculation exercise. Come back here and here it is. Now I'll give you the solution and show you what my opponent saw and what she actually missed. So obviously here I'm going to take the bishop, right? Because the bishop doesn't have many squares, so I'm going after the bishop. So up to this point we had gotten here, right? What's the problem? The problem is that now my opponent had seen that on c4. This was my opponent's idea. The reason she played h3, she could have played with the knight. Knight takes d4, bishop takes d4, pawn takes c4. Now I have to capture with the d-pawn, because obviously I have to defend the bishop. And at this point there are 2 very interesting variations. The strongest here is queen to f3, which now attacks the rook. I have to defend the rook with rook to a7, and after knight to e4, she sacrifices the bishop to me. But to break into the whole position aggressively, see how many weaknesses I have. And above all, watch out, there's the very strong rook to d1 coming, which pins the bishop even further. In short, to keep it brief, black really has too many weaknesses and would have lost the piece with interest. So she was really clever because she saw this variation, which is very strong. Basically, she wanted to trick me. She told me, okay, take the piece, I'll play this line and put you in a lot of trouble. Even here, it's actually interesting, also interesting. Besides queen to f3, bishop to e5 also had to be considered, which isn't bad at all. Obviously the bishop is pinned, and with this move, let's say I'm attacking the piece on d4, but I'm also attacking the rook on h7. Here, let's say, by pure coincidence, black plays the move knight to c6, which is still good for black, but the other line with queen to f3 is very, very strong for white. Alright, at this point, let's see if you found the solution, because in reality there is a solution. And black manages to win thanks to an intermediate move, because here, after bishop to b3, what did I do? Knight to e6 as an intermediate move, so I remove the threatened knight that would have been captured on the next move, but at the same time I attack her bishop. So with this intermediate move, she is forced to either move or defend the bishop. And at this point, c4, now she does capture the piece. Because white no longer has that counterplay where they would capture the knight on d4 and then bring in all their pieces. So how do we address this calculation problem? This mistake with the intermediate move. This here is a mistake in move order, a calculation error. I've already made 2 videos on the channel where I talk to you about this SKAC method for finding candidate moves. Well, for example, here. In this position, knight to e6 is among the candidate moves. Direct attacks, so remember the SKAC method: checks, captures, direct attacks, and pawn contacts. So here for checks, we have knight takes f3. For captures, let's say, we have knight takes b3. And here, what are the direct attacks? Obviously, c4 is a direct attack, it attacks the bishop. b4 is a direct attack, it attacks the knight. And obviously, sorry, for captures, there was also the bishop. As for h3 though, we quickly discard it, but another direct attack, of course, is knight to e6. And in this position, once you visualize the move knight to e6, you already understand that black wins after knight to e6. So here, the difficulty in seeing knight to e6 itself lies in the order in which you are searching for candidate moves. And we do this with the SKAC method, because if we search for candidate moves in an orderly way, knight to e6, we see it because it's a direct attack on the bishop. So this error here, the one about the intermediate move, how do we fix it? By correctly searching for candidate moves. SKAC method. Go back and watch the videos. Now let's move on to the third example, which is a very entertaining one. We're at the Amantea tournament and I'm playing against one of my students who is a strong candidate master and also a really aggressive player, really extremely aggressive. We'll call this mistake the mistake of greed. What is the mistake of greed? The mistake of greed is when we see a combination, fall in love with it, and want to play it at all costs. Here, in fact, I'm playing white, and at this moment I have an extra piece. I just captured the knight on c6, so now I need to defend myself a bit. At this point, I played the move. Knight to h4. And here, the correct move for black would probably have been to retreat with the bishop to e6, and then try to continue with his counterplay. Because it's true that I have an extra piece, but still, I'm kind of caught in the crossfire here. I'm not having an easy time, and I'll still have to work hard to survive. Here, my student, on the other hand, went straight for it here, going for this beautiful sacrifice with knight takes f2. What is the idea behind knight takes f2? At this point, and I played knight takes f5, but at this point, if I had captured on f2, which is also another possible move, right? Because someone might say, but don't you lose the queen? Sort of, because in this way I've taken so many pieces, right? Look here, I basically still have a rook and 2 pieces for the queen. So I still have a lot of counterplay and definitely a lot of material. But here he had basically seen this solution. Bishop takes f2, king takes f2. And here, queen to c5, a very strong intermediate move, king to e1. And here comes a really beautiful move which he fell in love with. So he wanted at all costs to play this line, which is bishop to d3. Bishop to d3 is a very nice move because now it forces me to capture on e8, and at this point, after queen takes c4, you can see it. Black's attack is too strong and simply everything is hanging. And so obviously this here is already made, right? And so he fell in love with this line. And he also analyzed the line that I played. I didn't, right? Because I played knight takes f5, and this is his idea. Bishop takes e3, knight takes e3, knight takes h1. Now I have to lighten the position, right? To survive, I have to exchange some pieces. So rook to d1, rook takes d1, king takes d1. And he saw queen e5, king d2, queen d4, check. Obviously, I can't move the king because I lose the knight, so I have to play queen to d3, queen takes d3, bishop takes d3. And he, finally, in this position, had seen that he would be able to escape with knight to f2. But here I had an in-between move, which is bishop to f5, check. And at this point, the bishop protects the knight's escape square, so obviously here I simply move the bishop, and then he loses the knight and therefore loses the game. Because there are 3 pieces for the rook, which is objectively too many. Obviously, this combination is very complicated, but we're talking about a fairly high level. So this was played by my student, who is a strong player, 2100. So we're talking about a very good level and, above all, with great tactical instinct. He calculates really well, though. Here, he fell so much in love with the combination that, out of sheer greed, he wanted to play it at all costs, even though it actually wasn't the right move. So here too, how do we correct our moments of greed? Again, with proper calculation. Because we shouldn't let ourselves be dazzled by a beautiful combination, we need to evaluate all the possible responses of our opponent using the SCAC method, which is the method I always recommend to you. So today I wanted to share these 3 nice positions with you to talk about these 3 common calculation mistakes and how you can also train to avoid them. So I hope these tips will be useful to you. As always, I look forward to a nice like, a nice comment as usual, and I'll see you in the next videos.